So finally, amongst those four basic facets, we come on to the colour of light. Now this may be a technical thing that you're already familiar with, particularly if you've watched some of the videos in my technical fundamentals course. If not, go back and have a look at them. I'll stick a link in the comments below. But I'm going to start with a quick introduction to colour, temperature and white balance, and then take you through some tips on keeping colour accurate in your photos.
Right, time to talk about the colour of light. Now, if you've been through my Technical Foundations course, this will be familiar to you, but perhaps worth a recap anyway, and certainly if you've not seen it, you really need to understand this. Basic rule is all light has a colour. Now, that's often not something we're aware of because our eyes are very, very good at adjusting, and we often only notice that light is a colour if there's a contrast, if we see two different types of light in the same scene. The colours of light fit within this scale, what's known as the Kelvin scale, from very, very warm colours down here at 1000 Kelvin to things like candlelight, all the way through to about 10,000, which is the blue of a blue sky. Why you need to know this is that the camera, hello camera, sets its white balance either automatically or you set it manually, and it can only be set to one temperature. You can have it set to 5,000 or 3,500 or 8.5, whatever it might be, but it can only be set to one temperature. Okay, that means that if you're set for, let's say for argument's sake, 5,000 Kelvin, you'll set your camera for that, so that's nearly the same as electronic flash or daylight. That means that if the scene is lit by this sort of light, the colour will look neutral. Okay, if you are lighting a scene with sunlight, switch layers there. If the light you're on matches the colour temperature the camera is set to, you won't see any colour cast. The lighting will look neutral. So of course if you are instead shooting with tungsten light down there and you set your camera to tungsten light, that'll be fine, not a problem. Same goes all the way around. As long as your camera is set to match the light you're under, you won't see any colour casts. You can guess what's coming, can't you? If you're in the wrong place, you will see a colour cast. So over here we have a book with medals, red, white, blue, etc, etc. Now this is shot under tungsten light with the camera set to tungsten. So that is this situation. Camera is set to tungsten and the light itself is tungsten. Okay. If by comparison, so here's our scene, if instead we switch the white balance that the camera is under to daylight, so now we've set the camera to daylight, but we're still under tungsten light, the light colour cast becomes very, very orange. Yeah? See how this white that should be nice neutral white like that has gone very, very orange? That is because, of course, the light falling on it is this sort of colour, and we've set our camera for this sort of colour. By the same token, here we have exactly the same subject, so you're familiar with the layout, in daylight, with the camera set to daylight white balance. Okay, so that is this situation. Daylight is falling on the subject and our camera white balance is set for daylight white balance. You know what's coming. We're going to go from this to switching the camera white balance to tungsten, but it's still being lit by daylight. So what we have here is the daylight falling. Let's just hide that tungsten bulb because I don't need it. And the camera is set down here to tungsten. What that means, of course, is the light falling on it now looks very, very blue compared to what we're set for. That's the simplest way I can describe it. It matters because, of course, unless you're trying to be particularly weird and creative, you want your shots to look like this, not like this. You know, you want whites to be white and blues to be blues, rather than whites to be turned into all sorts of different tones and very, very hard to pick out what accurate colour you were going for. We are going to get on later on to mixing different colours within a scene, but for now all you need to understand is that the camera can only be set to one thing at once, and unless you want there to be weird colour casts, you need to be set for the colour of light you're shooting under.
The best way to get accurate colour in your images is to shoot an image either with a grey card in it or some version of a white balance card or colour reference checker. This is just a very small one that I carry in the camera, but you can get great big ones that are a whole colour palette as well as a white and a black and a neutral grey. What these allow you to do is they give you a neutral tone as a reference point. These are, objective, if you like. This is absolutely neutral colour, this is absolutely neutral colour. There should be no cast in these at all, which is why they cost a bit more than you might think. They're not actually just any old bit of grey card. And the reason you have to use these is because, unfortunately, our eyes are not great at judging colour. We tend to ignore the cast created by certain light sources. We often don't notice that the, say, white of a wall is actually a hint of yellow or a hint of green. And if we think that's accurate, then other colours in the frame can often be inaccurate. For example, things like skin tones. We may find the entire image ends up being far warmer than we thought because what we assumed was white wasn't actually white at all. Using something like these allows you to be objective about that and give you an accurate colour representation. Now, as far as taking the image goes with these in, obviously this image that you use like that isn't going to be in your final edit. It's used as a reference shot when you're putting your images together and editing them afterwards. And in some cases what you can do is you can fill the frame with one of these or one of these and then actually set your camera to this white balance. Exactly how you do this will vary from camera to camera, so of course I'm not going to go into detail now. But what is more common and what I do all the time with shoots is when I'm in the lighting that I'm going to be in, and I know I'm set for the shot I'm about to take, I will take an image with one of these in it, and then afterwards, in my post-processing stage, because I shoot in RAW file format, I will go to the image with this in, I will set the white balance to this neutral tone, and I will copy and paste that white balance across the rest of the images that were done in that lighting situation. And of course, if the lighting then changes, or I move to a different location and things change, I will shoot another reference image. This keeps the colour consistency the same all the way through. It means that my colours are accurate, and I don't run the risk of having funny skin tones, walls that should be white coming out blue or yellow. It just increases the quality of my images right across the board. Now, in keeping with that consistency, I don't tend to use auto white balance setting on the camera very much. The reason for this is that although it can often do a perfectly decent job of giving you okay colour from shot to shot, the problem is it's like auto exposure, in that it sees what's in front of it in the frame, it matches all those things together, it works on its own algorithms that it's been put together in some lab in Tokyo, and it then decides, right, this is the perfect white balance, just like auto exposure says this is the perfect exposure. So if the frame changes, the white balance might change as well, even if the lighting doesn't change. Let's say I'm indoors and I'm being lit by tungsten lights from overhead, so I've set my white balance to match that. Things are nice and consistent. And if I change the frame, but the lighting doesn't change, well, my white balance won't change. If instead I'm on auto white balance, in the same situation, I've got tungsten lights overhead and I'm on auto white balance, I'll take the first shot and the auto white balance will look at the images in the frame, it'll look at that big area of red, that big area of blue and that big area of white, and it will create an okay white balance automatically. The catch is if I reframe slightly and the objects within the frame change, so there's more of them in the frame, less of them in the frame, or other objects are introduced, the auto white balance may well change as well, because it may suddenly see a big area of yellow coming into the frame, and it may instantly shift the white balance in a different direction, even though the light hasn't actually changed. So from image to image to image, the white balance might be shifting quite a lot. And I would rather not have that. I would rather things are consistent. So as I was saying earlier, what I do is I will simply shoot a reference image within each lighting setup I'm in, and then as I change lighting setups or I move to different locations, shoot another lighting reference, leave my white balance on the camera set to as close as I can get to what the white balance should be, and then things will be consistent from frame to frame all the way through. Okay, so some fairly basic technical stuff there. As I say, you may already be familiar with some of it from the technical basics course that I've been running for ages. If you've got any questions, stick them in the comments below. Otherwise, hit like if you like what you're seeing, subscribe for regular notifications, you know how YouTube works, etc, etc, etc. And I'll see you next week when we try and bring all the four facets of light together.